Hey, and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we're going to be continuing with our VFX core skills for beginners. In our previous one we did some very quick layout, preparing our scan, making sure it's orientated and scaled in the correct scale. And if you haven't managed to do this, the scan is on the previous download, so you can catch up, you don't have to process it. But yeah, so in this one we're now going to start doing the Matchmove, and we've already done loads of this, so you guys shouldn't have any problems tracking this. It's probably one of the easiest shots. But we'll still go through the process because there's also one extra little thing I like to do as well with the lighting reference. But yeah, hope you guys are enjoying this series so far. Yeah, and let's crack on with doing the Matchmove side. So I've opened up 3D Equalizer. I've done tons of tutorials on this already, so I won't go through every single tiny thing, but I'll try and explain everything that I do just in case you're starting at this point. But if you want to know more about Matchmove stuff, I've got loads of tutorials. Just go to my playlists. So we've got 3D open. So the first thing that we want to do is load in our image sequence. So we're going to go to the top, select our sequence 1 camera, then our camera tab and select browse. Then you want to navigate to your folder and go to your BGO1. And remember when we did sort of BGO1 and ELO1 and when we transcoded our footage, remember we actually put our reference plate and a chart on the end of this. So if we go straight to the end, we can see that we've actually got this color chart and our reference balls. And I probably should have actually moved that into a different file, but it's not a big deal. I can just leave them there on the end. It just means I just have it all together. Not really anywhere does this company wise, but for me this makes sense. It just keeps everything together and I'm not looking for everything. I know everything I need, lighting, reference and color wise, it's all in the plate. But everywhere does it different. I think this is probably just a personal choice that I do. But you can just chop those last frames off and put them in the element folder if you want. Cool, so we've got our plate in, and as usual, because it's in a linear color space, it's quite dark. So the first thing that we can do is go to our 8-bit color conversion. And we can change this to 2.2. And it should normalize itself to a relatively close color space to what we had it as originally. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to cache out our image sequence, because if we press spacebar now, we can't really play through it. It's quite slow. So we're just going to go to playback and export buffer compression file. And this might take a little bit of time, but importing it back in will be really quick. But yeah, it shouldn't take too long, to be honest. So yeah, we'll probably just fast forward through this. So that's now exported. So our next step would be just to select import buffer compression, and that'll be really quick. So we're just loading in the image cache. Now if we press spacebar, we can see it playing through really nicely. Go from the beginning. You can see it's not a very complicated shot, so we should be able to do this relatively quick. And it's even cached up those ones at the end. Cool, so what we can do is just, let's set this up so it doesn't solve for those. Because we can remove that if we really want, but for now I'm just gonna go to the last frame, so 266, change my frame range calculation, change that to 266. So now it won't calculate any further past that point. And then I can also move my frame range player as well. So when every time I press play, it goes through there. Cool, so we don't have to worry about those end ones now. Cool, so if you open up your camera data, you should have this. And it tells you that it's the Blackmagic production camera. The sensor size is 21.12 by 1188. It was shot on 1135 Sigma. And the focal length was 19 millimeters, or around that. And I've even got the scale ref in here from when we did the layout. And I say 19mm, it's a good starting place. It might not end up being exactly 19mm, but it should be pretty close. So the first thing that I want to do is fill out this. So I'm just going to pull this to the side, because I'll just go behind. And if we go over to our lens, you'll see that we've got our focal length settings here. We've got film back width and film back height. And you'll notice that one's on passive and one is on fixed. So all we want to do is change the film back height to the height that we have here, which is 11.88. So I'm going to change this to 11.88. And make sure you put millimeters, otherwise it will automatically convert to centimeters. So it will automatically convert it to centimeters, but if you don't put millimeters, it will think it's centimeters. So now we're looking at this, we can see our sensor size is correct. Then we can change our focal length to 19 millimeter. And this just gives us a really good starting place. So now also in your camera data package, you should have the lens grids. So we're going to load in the lens grid. And how we're going to do this, we're going to right click up here at the top left, add new reference camera. And that should make a ref 2 camera under your main sequence camera. So now if we double click on this, the plate will go away because now we're in a new camera. And we just do the same thing again. We go to live action footage, select browse, and this time we can go to bird box, on set, ref. Where did I put these? Brushes. Cam data. There we go. So we've got the Sigma 18 to 35 lens grids. And if you just check sequence view, it will bring them all separately. So you've got 19mm here, so it makes sense to start with that. And you can see now it's brought in a lens grid. And we'll do the same thing again. We'll change our gamma to 2.2 because these have also been transcoded to a linear color space. And if we press F3, this will go to our distortion grid menu. And you should see this sort of red rectangle matrix in the middle. And you see these little black circles. So all we need to do is click and drag, and you should see a zebra line, and it should snap to the corner. So we're just going to snap to the corner of the first 3 here. And you want to make sure you do something like this. You can do it all manually, but you have a button down here that's called snap. And if you've got a nice clear lens grid like this, you can click snap, and it will automatically find the rest of the places. So now we need to fill out the rest of this lens grid. So if we press Control and press up, it will start extending the column upwards, and hold Control down, and that will start extending it downwards. And the same with left and right, so Control left, and just fill it out, Control right. And if you do too many, that's fine. It doesn't matter because it automatically, as soon as it's out of the frame, it will disable them. But if you wanted to delete them, you just press Shift and right, and that'll get rid of the ones on the right. So we've now filled out our lens grid. We just now need to calculate it. So if we go up to the top here where it says calculate distortion and camera geometry, then all you need to do is select calculate lens parameters. And this will go through and it will solve all our distortion values from the grid. And it should have a really good deviation. Yeah, and see there's not a huge amount of difference here, but if we set parameters and close, we can toggle this button off and on. And this will give us an example of, it just shows us our distortion. It's not doing anything apart from viewing it. So it doesn't matter if you leave that on or off. It's just so we can see it. So now our next thing is to go, if we double click back on our sequence camera, and we press F2, if we press F5, we can now see that that distortion is now translated onto our image sequence. So now we've done that, we want to bring in our Layout Geo. So if we go to our point groups at the top left, select our 3D models, right click, add new, and import OBJ file. And if we go to our layout, and you should have your bird box layout, VO1, the one that we exported, and select OK. This might take a little bit of time to import because it's quite large, but 3D does handle high poly counts quite nicely. You just might want to go get a drink or something whilst this is loading, or something. It could take a while or not. But yeah, I hope you guys. I know I probably didn't even really need to do Matchmove one. I've got plenty of tutorials on that already, but I want to give this solid foundation or core skills thing, so anyone can start this playlist and get the best understanding of the entire VFX pipeline, and then you can just pick and choose what area you want to advance in, I think. And yeah, it just gives you such a good start if you've not done any VFX before. Well, so that's now finally loaded in, and we won't see anything because we need to go to F6. So if you press F6, it should take you to your 3D viewing menu or 3D orientation, and you can see that we've got now our layout scan. And the first thing that you always want to do is go to your 3D model, select it, and check is reference only. We can turn performance rendering off because it gets a little bit annoying, but you can leave it on if you like it, and make sure that this is ticked. Most important checkbox that you want. Otherwise, if you save it, it will take ages to open up, if it opens up at all. Then we can just bring down our alpha to sort of see our scan a little bit better. And we can just left click to rotate around, and we can see it's nicely laid out. It's in the right scale and right place. And so what you probably want to do is you probably actually want to save it now. So I'm just going to go, in fact, I'm going to go to F2 menu and save, because surprisingly enough, it saves faster. And I do actually need to set up a file for this, so I'm going to call this new directory MM for Matchmove. We'll call this bird box MMV01. Just select OK, now that's saved. So what I always do with Matchmove is do the single frame lineup, but we want to find a good frame to line up first with. Pretty much all these frames will be really good to line up on, so let's pick one with the most. So let's just go with 125. Cool. So what we want to do now is we can go to our, actually what we want to do is go to F6. If we select our model, forgot about this, because we've also got our texture, we can turn our texture mapping on, select it UV mapping. This might take a little bit of time, and we go to our UV map. And what we can do is select our JPEG, and I think that's the one. Yeah, there's only one in there, so. And you won't see it yet, because you need to turn off show lines, then select show polygons. And now we can see we've got our texture. And this is really important for getting, you don't need this, we can do a lineup without this, but if you have it, I would always use it. If it's available to use textures to line up with, always do it, because the lineup is the most important part of your camera solves. So we're going to go to F5 now, and I can hold Shift and right click. And it's going to be quite slow probably. And Shift left click to rotate around. In fact, actually this is a bit cumbersome, so what we'll do is actually just switch between F6. I'm just going to zoom in. It might be a little bit slow at first. because I know that I'm just going to sort of roughly line it up as in the 3D view that I can see in the 2D view, just so I can get a rough idea of things I can accurately select to get a rough lineup first. So what I'm doing, I'm looking for things I can see on here, so we can actually minimize that. So this is going to be the easiest thing to line up, so because they're quite obvious things. So I can see this part here. So I'm just going to control left click. I'm not going to track it. I'm just making a single frame. Then I'm going to press F6. Then extract vertex. Then left click. And you can see it. You might be able to just see it, but it's made a yellow point here. And that's marked, that's surveyed it in a 3D space. So I'm going to do the same thing for something else. I'm just going to go back to F6, see what else I can pick. So I can see this one here. So I'm just control left click, press F6, extract vertex. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We're just doing a rough lineup first. So we can go to F6 and see what else we can see. I can sort of see this bit here, so, and that's, I think that's there. So I can press F5, or F6, sorry. Extract vertex. And just roughly click it there. Then I can see this now, I've seen that, I can see this shape, so control left click and press F6. And extract vertex, and just click here. And I'm going to press F5, and then we can select match frame. And see, that's pretty much got us very close already. And we can turn off our 3D model. And because it's just a rough lineup, we may not be absolutely perfect, but we've got it really close for a good start. Cool, so we're going to continue doing this lineup because now we can see way more accurate places to survey. So I'm going to go to F2, control left click there. But I'm actually going to, so these were my initial survey points. I'm going to select them all, right click, modify. Just change the color to blue. Just so I know that these are the first rough ones. They're still going to be there, it's just I know that I'm probably going to have to change them. Because now these red ones are going to be my more accurate ones. So I'm selecting that point there. I can extract, probably extract polygon because then it's not relying on an actual vertex. Then I'm just going to try and get as many points as I can find that I can line up. Because the more accurate you can get this, the better your solve will be. So I'm just going to control left click. And you don't need lots. I'm going to extract polygon. I'm just going to match point on the geometry. And I'm going to go down around where these previous ones were, because I know that these were just roughly placed. But now I can pick and choose much more smaller pieces to get a more accurate survey. I'm just going to do it on each side. And obviously, the more accurate you get this, the nicer your lighting is going to be for sure. Okay. So just go to F2. So I'm switching between F2 and F5 when I'm doing this. I don't know if I mentioned that. I have loads of tutorials on 3D equalizer, so if you got a little bit stuck on this, don't worry. There's, just look at my playlists. There's loads. So now I'll go to actually pick that bit there. Control left click. So 5. Extract polygon, and it's around about here. Cool. So now I'm just going to do these bits at the back because I can see those. So I'm just going to pick more accurate placements. This is actually pretty close at the back. Just Control left click and press F5. Obviously where it's a little bit blurry, it's probably not as a reliable source as I'd say, but it's still pretty good. So I'm just making all these single frame points. You can see they're pretty much getting on top of each other now. Cool, so I'm just going to press Alt-C and solve for that. So now I'm going to select my first 4. Let's hide these, because these are all the blue ones that I roughly placed at the start. I'm just going to right click, survey, and survey free them, and press Alt-C. We still have one here, which is kind of quite off. But let's have a look. That could be a poorly placed. Looks like not a great placed point. It's quite hard to tell sometimes. Let's move this to here. That's a bit clearer. Then we can extract polygon. Alt-C. Cool. So I'm just going to full frame that. If we turn our 3D models off and on, we can see that's lining up almost perfectly. The only thing's changing is pretty much the light. So now what we can also do is to get this a little bit more accurate, because I know we said it's a 19mm, but this can change from focal distances, so we want to also adjust this. So if we select fixed and change it to adjust, then you can go to your Windows parameter adjustment window, and you can leave it on brute force. It shouldn't make much of a difference. And if you change it to adaptive, it doesn't. It works in different ways. At the moment, we've got enough data to just brute force it, so it should be fine. And yeah, so we've improved it a little bit, and it's just like 19.5mm. So I'm pretty happy with that for now. So I'm just going to press Alt-C again and resolve it. And I'm just going to turn my 3D models off and on. And you can see there's basically no shift at all when you flick between the two. So we've done our single frame lineup, so I'm just going to save that. Let's say project as. I'm just going to overwrite instead of versioning up, but you might want to version up. So I can now delete these first 4. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select all these. I'm actually going to go to F5 first, and I'm going to store my pose. And that stores that position, but we're going to save this because it doesn't always store it, and remove pose sometimes accidentally gets clicked. So I'm just going to right click, calculation, and disable. And it's important that you turn these off, otherwise it's going to break everything. Then I'm just going to view, hide selected points. I'm going to right click, add new point set. I'm just going to call this SF for single frame. I'm going to select all these points, middle mouse click, and drag under there. So now all our single frame points are turned off and they're hidden under a folder. So now we press F2. Now we can start tracking the shot. So you want to go back to your first frame. You don't have to, you can start anywhere, but starting at a first frame is probably the best place. We can go to view and turn off our FOV, and that gets rid of this crosshair in the middle. We don't need it. And this time we're going to track it, not just do single frames. So you want to make sure that your track's going to last throughout the entire range, which we shouldn't have any problems tracking this. So I'm just going to control left click, and you're not going to change, you don't need to change any of the settings here. I'm going to gauge marker. And gauge marker basically says, takes a snapshot of the sort of pattern box, and it's saying, look for this shape in here. It does it anyway when you select track, but I just like to click it out of habit anyway. And you can sort of see it's kind of flying around. Make sure you're on center 2D. So now it's going to center on that point, and you'll be able to see if it's not tracking correctly. So I'm just going to control left click again. And now it's on center 2D. I'm back at the first frame. I'm going to gauge marker and select track. And you can see now the frame is centering onto the 2D point. And it's stopping at 266 where we told it to stop, which is good. So I'm just going to do 3 points in the foreground and 3 points in the background. And to deselect, press Alt left click and Control left click to make a new one. Gauge marker and track. I'm probably going a little bit faster than I usually would in this because I've just done so many of these. So let's make sure if it does that, it's because it's gone onto the reference frame, which we don't want. So just make sure you end the point so it turns off. Cool. So you've got 3 in the foreground, and now let's go back to our first frame. Select this point here, Control left click, gauge marker and track. And it should track pretty quickly. You shouldn't have any problems at all tracking this. This should be the easiest track ever. So I'm going to make sure that I go to my frame 266 and select end point so it turns off before we get to the reference. And if you've removed that reference plate, it's entirely up to you. I probably should have removed it, to be honest. But to me, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to make another point here. Gauge marker and track. I'm just going to go to frame 266, end the point, and just do one more up here, gauge marker. So you need a minimum of 6 points for it to track. Oh, let's go back to the first frame because it's just easier. We want to resize that so it's got only stuff in the foreground, gauge marker and track. And I'm just going to go to frame 266 and end the point. So you can track stuff in the background if you really want to. We don't really need to, but out of good practice, we probably should. So I am just going to track a point here. Then I go to frame 266, end point. And I'm just going to stick another point there. Gauge marker and track. Don't necessarily have to do this, but it's just good practice to make sure that you get a good solve if you haven't got it. Survey. So we've gone all those points now. So now what we need to do, we need to survey these to the geometry. So if we go to the frame, we do our single frame lineup, and that should be highlighted in red on your timeline. So now if you press 3D models, we don't have to worry about those. So let's just select them one at a time. Let's select it here. And you go edit projector points on 3D models, or you can set up a shortcut. But it's only 6 points. We won't go for setting up a shortcut. If you want to, you can just right click and define shortcut. But it's, we won't do that now. We'll just go through and survey because it's only 6 points. So we edit project points on 3D models. And sometimes it won't work because it doesn't like it. It's the clipping plane. You can adjust the clipping plane or just a zoom in. And it should work. And you should start seeing these green crosses. And that means it's plotting the 2D points in its 3D space. So if we get to F6 now, we should be able to, if we rotate around, it's a little bit slow because it's quite a heavy mesh. If you go view, show image planes, none. And we can see these green points here. That's where we're plotting them in the 3D space. So if we go edit, projector points, or P if you've already set up your shortcut. And now we're going to do these ones in the background. You don't have to do them all one by one. You can hold Alt and left click and select them all. Edit, projector points on 3D models. It's just good practice to do them one at a time, so you can definitely check they've been projected in the right place. You have to zoom in a little bit to get these to work. Cool, so we don't have to survey those because we've got nothing to survey to. We can just leave those free. So now we've surveyed those, the next thing is to solve it. So, well, maybe actually save it. So I'm just going to save. Just going to overwrite. And now press Alt-C to solve. And now you should get this window up and it's showing. If we right click and zoom in, we can sort of see our camera movement. And these are our keyframes. And these yellow points are the ones we've just surveyed. And those two ones in the background are the ones we haven't. So I'm just going to select use result. And we've got a pretty good deviation. We've just got some strange curves here, which are likely to do with slight. After a while, you'll sort of get a good idea of what this curve is doing. So, albeit 0.2 is a pretty good deviation, it does rise up here. And to me, this looks like it's possibly might need a slight distortion solve. So what we can do is select a lens. And I'm just going to select the distortion and the quartic distortion. I'm not going to select anything else because you shouldn't need to. So I'm going to go to my Windows, parameter adjustment window. I'm just going to turn off my quartic and my focal length. I'm going to clear that and just select adjust. And you can see it's very slightly changed to 2.338 from 2.832. If we solve that again, we can see that we've reduced it. So naturally we're going to go turn this one off. I would just like to clear it every time and select adjust. And that's just very slightly adjusted it again. So press Alt-C and solve. And that's reduced it. So now what I'd like to do now is turn that off and clear that and do our focal length now. And that has gone up, so I'm just going to cancel that. It's more than likely, if we select these 2 points here, it's more than likely, if we go to F6, they're probably projected. If we look at the Geo, it's probably not that accurate. But it's close. So what we can do, we can go to F5, and we can right click, modify, survey, and approximately surveyed. And this basically says this is surveyed roughly in an area of 10 centimeters. So now if I press Alt-C, and that's reduced it quite a bit. But when we look at it, so if we look at our deviation curve like this, it looks like there's some crazy stuff going in the middle. So we could probably actually, and in reality, this is just average. So what you really want to keep an eye out for is probably this number here. Because this is showing you what the values are at the time of the average. And we never go 0.5, so it's still really good, a really good solve. And if it's still a problem, we can try survey 3, and that will get rid of it completely. But obviously, the less survey we have, the more likely we'll break the solve. But in this case, it's looking really good. So we got a pretty good solve here. turn that off. And go to our model. And let's turn our show polygons off and show lines on. And let's zoom in and turn up our alpha. Because this is what really matters here. And we can see that we've got, if we just turn off our 3D points, we can see that this is sticking really well. So let's just turn that off and save our project. And we're pretty much done now. So our next thing is to export out all the things that we need. So this has been quite a long tutorial again. I didn't want them to be very long, but it's probably been quicker than most of the other ones. Some of them been hours long. So we've done that now. So our next thing is to export this all out. So I'm going to be really quick now. So if we go to 3D4 at the bottom, export project, then we select export Maya, or to be honest, you can probably do this into Houdini, FBX, as FX or Blender, 3ds Max, it's fine. I can't tell you what happens and what doesn't happen. I know if you export to Nuke, it gives you a little package, which can be quite useful. But in Maya, if I need it in anything else, I'll just export it as an Alembic. So I am going to export it as into Maya. So you need to make sure your start frame is the same frame as your image sequence. I'm going to select export file. And I'm actually just going to stick this in my Matchmove folder. So I'm just going to Word, box, VO1. I'll call this cam actually. Matchmove cam. And select OK. So now we go to 3D4, File, Export, Nuke 3D4 Lens Distortion node. And this will export the Nuke node for us. So I'm going to put this in the Matchmove as well. Just make sure you call it what it is, so you know exactly what you're looking for. Birdbox Nuke LD node VO1. Select OK. So now the last thing we need to do is export out our undistorted plate. And what we can do is do it through Warp 4, or we can do it in Nuke or Natron. So if you go to 3D4 and select Warp 4, I like doing it in Warp 4 because only for other places might want you to do overscan and stuff like that, but for me it's easier just to keep it all in one package. I also forgot to do one other thing as well. We need to do one more little camera lineup. So I'm going to go to save footage and go browse. Go to our VFX tutors. Oh. And elements, and I'm going to put a new directory in here, and I'm going to call this UDP for undistorted plate. Call this same name as Birdbox Geo1 UDP VO1, and you need to make sure you put dot 4 hashes dot EXR. Needs to be the same file container as the one you've originally put in. So if we select OK, now all we need to do is select render, and that will start rendering them out. And it might take a little bit of time because there's quite a lot of them to do. And we can do this in Nuke as well. For me, it's just easier to do it this way. But yeah, we'll do that as well. I'll show you how to do that. But we do need to do one more thing, which I forgot, and that's I'm just going to pull this over to that side. We should still be able to do stuff whilst that's running. Cool. So I mentioned earlier that I also like to. The reason why this is on the end of the plate, so I can also now do this. So we've got our lens grid reference. I'm going to right click, add new, and another reference camera. And I'm just going to go back to here, and that's on 267. So I'm going to go browse, elements, BGA1, and I'm going to go to that single frame. Was it 267? 267. Select OK. And it's got our distortion on it already. And I can change my gamma to 2.2. Not everywhere it does this. This is just a personal thing that I do so I can get... I would probably consider myself a lazy lighter because I like to try and get it as close to the HDR as possible so I don't have to do that much. But in reality, you will still have to do a lot in lighting. So basically what we're going to do now, we're just going to do another single frame lineup, and that's it. And we're just going to line up this camera. So we can almost try to pick similar points, but we don't need to. So I'm actually going to select all these, calculation disabled, hide those for now. And if I remember points that I selected before, we should be able to line it up. So I'm just doing a single frame one again. Or we might need to bring back our texture. So that one's there. Extract vertex. Make sure you select your point, then extract vertex. And we're going to do the same thing. It's going to roughly get this lined up. Just by using single points. And we can do this quite quickly because we've already done it once with the normal camera. So I'm just going to go through and just extract the vertex. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we're only using this for the for reference position. But if you can get it pretty close, it's probably quite good. So yeah, so let's press Alt-C, and now that's lined up on that single frame. So now for 3D models, let's turn our 3D points on. And now we've got our camera pretty well lined up, to be honest. Even though these aren't perfectly surveyed, they're actually figuring out a better position. So I am just going to pick more accurate points that I can get a much tighter lineup. Just going to delete that one. I don't want that one anymore. And I'm going to move this one. I can see that point there, so I'm just going to change that to there. Extract polygon. Just Alt-C. Full frame. And you can see that's pretty close. We can get it closer though. We don't need to, but just out of sanity's sake, we can. Cool. And now we've pretty much got that lined up. So we can line these boards. So the reason why I'm doing this is because when we get to the lighting stage, like you can just throw your grey ball and chrome ball and Macbeth chart in there, and that's fine. But those are going to be representing the position of the HDRI. And we're going to extreme lengths to get the sort of HDRI right here. Most places won't do this, but this is just how I like to do stuff for my own project, sorry. So now when I place I can line up so if I go to F6, and let's see where my cameras are. Cool, so we've now got our camera there. And that just means that I can place my reference balls in the correct place and I get a better representation. So yeah, I'm pretty much happy with that. So I'm just press Alt-C and solve, so that gets locked in. Cool, so I will actually export my cameras again, because actually I do need to export it with that range. So I'm going to export project, my 1001, and I'm just going to overwrite my previous one because it's going to export all the cameras, and select OK. So now our next step would be to take this into Maya and just check it all out on in the Maya scene. But I think we'll do this in the next tutorial under setting up your project. So don't worry about importing this into Maya right now. You can if you want, and check it out, but I'm going to cover this in the next tutorial with setting up your project, and probably like a second pass of layout / post-viz as well. So it'll probably be a very, very quick tutorial. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.